Hey everybody, my name is Michael McDowell. It's great to be with you. Wanted to talk briefly about problem and project-based learning. What is the difference between problem and project-based learning and rigorous PBL? And I'm just going to share just a brief image with you just to give you kind of a sense of what's happening in terms of the research. So problem and project-based learning overall, in terms of all the studies that we've seen, has a modest effect size in terms of student learning. So when we look at the average of all of the different studies that have been done, it yields about 1 year's growth in 1 year's time. That 0.45 is just at the hinge point. That 0.40 is roughly about 1 year's growth in 1 year's time. This also has a high robustness level. One of the things that John Hattie did in his latest research study in 2023 on the sequel of visible learning is he ranks these influences based on a 1 to 5 scale and how stable or robust those effect sizes are. And a 5 is the highest. So this is really where we sit with problem and project-based learning. That effect size likely won't change, but there's a vast difference. When you look down at that arrow down there at the bottom, that we can see studies where problem and project-based learning has a devastating effect on student learning, a negative 0.30. That actually harms students. So it actually is less than 1 year's growth in 1 year's time. Where in some places, if we can design it and implement it the right way, it has a dramatic effect on student learning. It's almost like playing with fire. If we manage it well, it can be incredible. And one of the things that I think is really important for us to be thinking about is, well, what makes that big difference? And I think one of the things that we have to look at is we have to challenge some of these myths in PBL. Direct instruction is really important when students are building background knowledge when they're doing problem and project-based learning. They need to be able to separate the context. So the product they might be developing or the experience that they might be looking at. So if they're building a trifold board or doing a presentation or a podcast and they're doing it on Wolfram introduction, that's all context. That's all the things they're doing something through, as opposed to what they're learning, which is they're learning about food chains, they're learning about food webs. We need to challenge things about when and where and why we work in groups. We don't need to be in groups for an entire period of time in terms of a project. We also need to be thinking about small doable habits to enable students to go across learning things and relating things and applying things. And I think it's these myths around we got to build these big products and we got to be in groups for an extensive period of time. And we spend so much time on the designing of a product that we don't really spend the time around the learning. And when we do that, when we spend the time on the learning, we can make a substantial impact on student learning. And that's why we do a lot of work around making sure that when we design for innovation and we also design for impact. And both of those things are important. And we need to make sure that we bring students into having access to both of those things. When we do a lot of regular problem and project-based learning, what happens is, well, yeah, it works, but it doesn't have a substantial impact on student learning. We want to do things that make a substantial impact. And we want to make sure that we do that so that students not only can innovate in the future, but they also have the background knowledge in order to do it. So thanks, everybody.